If you enjoyed discovering these powerful psychology tricks and want to keep learning how the human mind really works, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future videos. Hit the like button if this helped you. Drop a comment below, telling me which technique surprised you the most, and don't forget to share this video with a friend who would love these insights too. The more we understand the mind, the stronger and smarter our choices become. So let's grow together. Zeigarnik Shift. Have you ever noticed how your brain keeps nagging you about something you left unfinished? Maybe it's a report you haven't completed, a message you still need to reply to, or even a show you stopped watching right in the middle of an exciting scene. That mental itch that keeps pulling you back until you finish the task isn't random. It's actually a psychological phenomenon called the Zeigarnik Shift. This idea was first noticed in the 1920s by psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, who was observing waiters in busy Vienna cafes. She realized something unusual. The waiters could perfectly remember long, complicated orders while they were still being served. But the moment the customers paid and left, the memory of those orders vanished almost instantly. The takeaway: our brains hold on much tighter to unfinished business than to things we've already wrapped up. Why does this happen? It's because the human brain naturally seeks closure. When you begin something, even something small, your mind treats it like an open loop. That loop creates a quiet but powerful pressure to bring things to completion. Think of it like leaving a door half open. Your brain just wants to push it shut. That's why unfinished projects often feel so heavy on your mind, and why you sometimes can't relax until you deal with them. Here's where it gets useful. If you're procrastinating on something big, like writing a paper, cleaning your room, or starting a workout, the hardest part is usually just getting started. But if you trick your brain into simply opening the loop, everything changes. For example, instead of forcing yourself to finish the whole report, you might just sit down and write the first sentence. Now your subconscious sees it as unfinished business, and that psychological tug will keep nudging you back until you naturally want to complete it. This is also why TV shows often on cliffhangers. Writers know the Zeigarnik Shift keeps audiences hooked. When an episode ends at the most suspenseful moment, your brain can't help but crave resolution. You're pulled back for the next episode. Advertisers also use it by showing incomplete scenarios that leave you curious, practically begging for closure. So, how do you use this in daily life? Simple. Just start small. Open the loop. If you want to exercise, just put on your workout clothes. If you need to study, just open the textbook and read one line. These small starts create that invisible pull, turning procrastination into momentum. The beauty of the Zeigarnik Shift is that it shows you don't need giant bursts of motivation to get things done. You just need to spark the process. Once the loop is open, your brain does the rest, pushing you naturally toward completion. That's the secret. Progress doesn't start with finishing. It starts with beginning. Paradoxical Intention. Have you ever had one of those nights where you desperately want to fall asleep, but the more you try, the more awake you feel? You lie in bed, tossing and turning, telling yourself, "I need to sleep now. Come on, relax. Fall asleep." And yet the harder you push, the further sleep drifts away. Or maybe you've been in a situation like public speaking. You're standing in front of people thinking, "Don't mess up, don't get nervous, don't let your hands shake." But ironically, the more you command yourself to stay calm, the more anxious you become. This frustrating cycle is incredibly common, but psychology has an unusual trick to break it. It's called Paradoxical Intention. The name sounds fancy, but the idea is surprisingly simple. Instead of fighting against the thing you fear, you deliberately invite it in. In other words, you do the opposite of what your instincts tell you. If you're scared of failing, you intentionally aim for failure. If you're worried about blushing, you encourage yourself to blush even more. If you're anxious about staying awake, you actually try to stay awake. This approach was developed by psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, the author of Man's Search for Meaning. He realized that many people make their anxiety worse by resisting it too strongly. By trying so hard not to feel nervous, they become even more nervous. By trying so hard to sleep, they stay wide awake. It's a loop of pressure and resistance. But paradoxical intention flips the game. It removes the pressure completely, because if you're intentionally doing the thing you fear, then there's nothing left to resist. Let's take an example. Imagine someone who always blushes in social situations. They feel embarrassed every time, and the fear of blushing only makes it worse. If this person uses paradoxical intention, they would say to themselves, "Okay, this time I'm going to blush as much as I possibly can. I'm going to make my face as red as a tomato." Now, instead of fighting the fear, they exaggerate it on purpose. And what happens? The anxiety loses its grip. By embracing the thing they're afraid of, the fear shrinks. In many cases, they end up blushing far less, or not at all. The same thing works with insomnia. Instead of saying, "I need to sleep, I must fall asleep right now," you flip it around and think, "I'm going to stay awake as long as I can. I'll try to see how many hours I can stay up." Oddly enough, the moment you take away the pressure to sleep, your body relaxes naturally, and you drift off. The more you try to force sleep, the less it comes. But when you stop resisting, sleep sneaks up on you effortlessly. Why does this method work so well? It's because anxiety feeds on resistance. The more you resist, the stronger it grows. But when you accept, invite, or even exaggerate the fear, it loses its fuel. It's like a fire. If you keep blowing on it with resistance, it grows. But if you stop feeding it, it dies out. Think about stage fright. A person about to give a presentation might be terrified of stumbling over their words. Normally, they would say to themselves, "Don't stutter, don't make a mistake, don't look nervous." But using paradoxical intention, they would think, "Okay, let me stutter on purpose. Let me make a fool of myself as dramatically as possible." And in doing so, the fear fades. Because how can you be afraid of messing up when you're trying to mess up? The pressure vanishes, and you gain freedom. What's beautiful about paradoxical intention is that it turns anxiety into a kind of joke. It uses the rebellious side of the human mind. Our brains don't like being controlled, even by ourselves. When we say, "Don't be anxious," our subconscious resists and creates more anxiety. But when we say, "Okay, let's be as anxious as possible," the rebellion flips the other way, and the anxiety weakens. It's like playing a trick on your own brain. Now, does this mean you should always aim to fail, or always invite fear? Of course not. The point isn't to sabotage yourself. The point is to remove the suffocating pressure that comes with trying too hard. By intentionally leaning into the fear, you strip away its power, and suddenly you're free to act naturally. So next time you find yourself stuck in a cycle of fear, whether it's sleepless nights, shaky hands during a presentation, or nervousness in social situations, remember paradoxical intention. Don't fight the fear. Invite it in. Tell yourself, "I'm going to exaggerate this fear. I'm going to do it on purpose," and you'll do it. Discover something powerful. The moment you stop resisting, the fear loses control. Paradoxical intention is more than a trick. It's a mindset shift. It teaches you that what you fear most can actually become the doorway to freedom. By facing it directly, even playfully, you rob it of its ability to dominate you. And in the process, you become calmer, braver, and surprisingly confident. The Benjamin Franklin Effect. Imagine this for a moment. You're trying to get along with someone who doesn't seem to like you. Maybe it's a co-worker who always keeps their distance, or a classmate who seems cold and unfriendly. Most people would think, "If I want this person to like me, I should do something nice for them." That feels logical, right? But here's where psychology flips the script. Research shows that people actually start liking you more when they do a favor for you, not the other way around. This surprising twist is known as the Benjamin Franklin Effect. The story goes back to Benjamin Franklin himself. During his political career, Franklin had a rival who openly disliked him. Instead of trying to win this man over with gifts or compliments, Franklin did something clever. He knew his rival owned a rare book, so he politely asked to borrow it. Flattered by the request, the man lent Franklin the book. Franklin later returned it with warm thanks. From then on, something strange happened. The rival who once disliked him began treating Franklin as a friend. By asking for a favor, Franklin had transformed an enemy into an ally. Now, why does this work? It all comes down to something psychologists call cognitive dissonance. That's just a fancy term for the mental discomfort we feel when our actions don't match our beliefs. If someone doesn't like you, but then they go out of their way to help you, their brain gets confused. Why would I help this person if I dislike them? To resolve this conflict, the brain shifts the belief. Well, maybe I don't dislike them after all. Maybe I actually like them. In other words, the act of helping you forces their feelings to change. Think about how powerful this is. We often assume that kindness is a one-way street, that if we give to others, they'll like us more. But psychology shows it works in reverse too. When people invert in helping us, their brains justify it by warming up to us emotionally. Doing the favor makes them feel connected. Let's make this practical. Imagine you start a new job, and there's a co-worker who seems distant or even a little hostile. Instead of avoiding them or trying too hard to win them over, you could try something small. Ask them for advice on how to navigate the workplace, or borrow a tool they're known for using. This tiny request might feel awkward at first, but it creates the exact psychological shift Franklin discovered centuries ago. By helping you, they start to see themselves as supportive, and slowly their attitude changes from cold to friendly. This doesn't mean you should manipulate people with endless requests. The Benjamin Franklin effect works best with small, genuine favors that don't feel exploitative. Asking someone to share their expertise, lend you a book, or explain a process makes them feel valued and respected. That feeling of being needed builds connection. You can even see this principle at work in relationships. Have you ever noticed that when people do something kind for their partner, they often report feeling closer afterward? That's because their brain justifies the effort with warmer feelings. It's the same effect. One important thing to note, this trick only works if the favor feels voluntary. If someone feels forced, they'll resent it. But if they choose to help you, even in a small way, it reshapes how they feel about you. The Benjamin Franklin effect teaches us a surprising truth about human nature. People don't just like others because of what they receive. They like others because of what they give. When we allow others to help us, we're actually giving them the gift of connection. So the next time you're faced with a cold co-worker, a distant classmate, or even a difficult family member, remember Franklin's clever strategy. Instead of bending over backward to win them over, try asking for a small favor. It could be as simple as borrowing something, asking for advice, or requesting their opinion. That little act might just open the door to friendship. Semantic satiation. Have you ever repeated a word so many times that it suddenly stopped sounding like a real word? Maybe you were joking with a friend and kept saying spoon, spoon, spoon over and over again. At first it sounded normal, but after a while the word felt strange, almost like nonsense sounds. It lost its meaning completely. That weird experience has a name: semantic satiation. The term may sound complicated, but the idea is simple. When you repeat a word too many times, your brain gets overstimulated. The mental link between the sound of the word and its meaning temporarily breaks. Instead of triggering an image or emotion, the word just becomes empty noise. It's like your brain takes a short break from processing the meaning. This effect was studied by psychologists in the 1960s, and while it might seem like just a fun party trick, it actually has deep psychological power. Words aren't just sounds. They carry emotions, memories, and mental associations. Think about words like failure, rejection, or embarrassment. Just hearing or saying them can create stress or fear. But here's where semantic satiation becomes useful. If you deliberately repeat one of these heavy words again and again, you can strip away its emotional weight. Imagine someone who is terrified of the word failure. Every time they think about failing, they feel anxious, discouraged, or even ashamed. If this person sat down and repeated failure, failure, failure for 2 minutes straight, something fascinating would happen. The word would stop feeling scary. It would lose its sting and turn into just meaningless sounds. Over time, the brain begins to separate the emotion from the word, making it far less intimidating. This technique can be powerful for anyone struggling with negative self-talk. Maybe you often call yourself stupid, worthless, or weak inside your own head. These words can cut deep, especially when repeated over years. But through semantic satiation, you can weaken their power. By repeating them out loud, slowly and deliberately, the words eventually dissolve into nonsense. What once hurt you becomes just noise. And when the words lose power, the emotions attached to them weaken too. Here's another way to think of it. Our brains are like radios constantly tuning into certain words. The more emotional charge a word has, the louder the radio plays it in our heads. Semantic satiation works like turning down the volume until the noise is so quiet it can't bother you anymore. Now, this isn't just for negative words. It also teaches us something profound about language itself. Words shape how we see the world. When we say love, success, or freedom, we don't just hear sounds, we feel something. Our whole perspective is influenced by words. That's why advertising, storytelling, and even political speeches are so powerful. The right words stir emotions. But semantic satiation reminds us that those words only have as much power as we allow them to have. Think of someone dealing with social anxiety. The word awkward might terrify them. They replay it in their head after conversations. I was so awkward. Everyone noticed. But if they practice semantic satiation with the word awkward, repeating it until it dissolves, they start to realize it's just a label, just a sound. It doesn't have the power to define them anymore. One important note. Semantic satiation doesn't erase meaning permanently. It's temporary. After a while, the word regains its normal meaning. But the more often you practice, the weaker the emotional grip becomes. It's like exercising a muscle of emotional detachment. So how can you use this in daily life? Pick a word that triggers negative feelings. Find a quiet space. Repeat the word out loud or in your head for 1 or 2 minutes. Notice how the word slowly loses its meaning and turns into nonsense. The key is consistency. Over time, you'll notice that the word no longer sparks the same anxiety or fear. Semantic satiation is a reminder that language is powerful, but also flexible. Words are only symbols, not ultimate truths. By practicing this trick, you can reclaim control over your emotional reactions. So next time a word haunts you, whether it's failure, rejection, or even awkward, try saying it over and over until it loses its bite. You'll find yourself laughing at how strange it sounds. And in that laughter, you'll realize something important. Words only have the meaning you give them. Pratfall Effect. We usually think mistakes make us look bad. In school, we're taught to avoid errors, and in work, we try hard to look perfect. But psychology reveals something surprising. Sometimes making a small mistake can actually make people like you more. This fascinating idea is called the Pratfall Effect. The term was coined in the 1960s by psychologist Elliot Aronson. He ran experiments where people listened to recordings of individuals answering quiz questions. In one version, the person answered nearly every question correctly and sounded very competent. In another version, the same person did well, but at the end, they accidentally spilled coffee on themselves. What happened? Listeners actually liked the person more after the mistake. The little blunder made them more relatable, more human, and easier to connect with. Why does this happen? Because perfection can be intimidating. When someone seems flawless, we admire them. But from a distance, they don't feel approachable. But when they slip up in a small, harmless way, it reminds us that they're human just like us. Suddenly, instead of intimidating us, they feel warm and genuine. Think about a public speaker. If they deliver their presentation perfectly, the audience might respect them, but feel no real emotional connection. Now imagine the same speaker accidentally drops their notes, chuckles, and makes a light-hearted joke about it. The audience relaxes. They laugh with the speaker. That little moment of imperfection creates connection. People leave remembering not just the content, but the speaker's charm. The Pratfall Effect shows up in everyday life too. Imagine you have a colleague who is known for being extremely efficient and professional. Everyone respects them, but few feel close to them. One day, they accidentally include a funny typo in a presentation and laugh at themselves. Suddenly, people see them differently. They're still competent, but now they feel approachable. Their mistake becomes a bridge that brings others closer. Of course, this doesn't mean we should purposely make big mistakes. The effect only works when you're already seen as capable. If you constantly blunder, people may just think you're careless. But for competent people, small mistakes add warmth. They make you seem authentic. Even famous figures have benefited from this. Steve Jobs, for example, often faced technical glitches during his product launches. Instead of panicking, he would laugh it off. These imperfections didn't damage his reputation. They actually made audiences trust him more, because he didn't pretend to be superhuman. So, how can you use the Pratfall Effect in your own life? Start by embracing small mistakes instead of hiding them. If you trip over a word in conversation, smile about it. If you spill a drink at a party, laugh instead of blushing. These moments of vulnerability can actually make people connect with you more deeply. The lesson of the Pratfall Effect is clear. Perfection doesn't create connection. Humanity does. Showing a little flaw now and then can be your biggest strength, because it reveals the real you. And that's the person people want to know. Solomon Paradox. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to give great advice to a friend, but when you're in the same situation yourself, you suddenly feel lost? Maybe your friend is struggling in a relationship, and you can instantly see what they should do. They need to set boundaries, or they should probably walk away. But then, when you face a similar problem, clarity disappears. You overthink, doubt yourself, and feel stuck. This strange gap in wisdom has a name, the Solomon Paradox. The name comes from the biblical king Solomon, who was famous for giving wise advice to others. People traveled from far and wide to hear his judgments and decisions. But ironically, in his personal life, Solomon often made poor choices. He could solve other people's problems with ease but struggled to handle his own. That's exactly what many of us experience today. So why does this happen? It's all about emotional distance. When you look at someone else's problem, you're not emotionally attached. You see the situation more logically. You can weigh the pros and cons clearly, without being clouded by fear, insecurity, or wishful thinking. But when it's your problem, emotions rush in. You're worried about losing something, making the wrong choice, or how others will see you. Suddenly, your judgment becomes cloudy. Here's an example. Imagine your friend Sarah is in a toxic relationship. She tells you her partner ignores her feelings, constantly criticizes her, and shows little respect. From the outside, it's obvious to you. Sarah deserves better. You advise her to walk away and focus on her own happiness. But then, imagine you're in the same type of relationship. Instead of walking away, you might cling to hope, telling yourself, maybe things will get better, or I don't want to give up just yet. The logic you had for Sarah disappears when emotions take over. This isn't just about relationships. It shows up in work, money, and everyday decisions too. You might easily tell a friend not to overspend on things they don't need. But then, when you see a big sale, you convince yourself, it's a good deal, I should grab it. The same wisdom you gave away suddenly doesn't apply to you. But here's the good news. Once you understand the Solomon Paradox, you can beat it. The trick is to create emotional distance from your own problems. One simple method is to talk to yourself in the third person. Instead of asking, what should I do? Ask, what advice would I give a friend if they were in this exact situation? This little shift pulls you out of the emotional fog and gives you the clarity you naturally have when helping others. For example, if Sarah struggles with making a career decision, she could reframe it by saying, What would Sarah tell a friend in this situation? By stepping outside herself, she starts thinking with logic, not just emotion. Studies have shown that this technique can dramatically improve decision-making, reduce stress, and even increase confidence. Another strategy is to write your problem down as if you're writing it for someone else. Imagine you're journaling about a friend's issue instead of your own. Once you see it written out, you can often spot solutions that felt hidden before. The Solomon Paradox teaches a powerful lesson. Wisdom isn't about having all the answers. It's about perspective. We all have wisdom, but emotions often block us from using it on ourselves. The key is to learn how to step outside your own shoes and see your situation as if it belonged to someone else. So next time you feel stuck, try this. Pause and ask yourself, if my best friend came to me with this exact problem, what would I tell them? Chances are the advice will be clear and practical. And here's the magic. You'll realize you've had the wisdom all along. You just needed to view it from the outside. The Solomon Paradox reminds us that clarity doesn't come from being smarter. It comes from being calmer and more detached. By learning to see ourselves the way we see others, we unlock the wisdom we've always carried inside. Limerence Regulation. Have you ever had a crush that completely took over your mind? You wake up thinking about them. You replay every little interaction in your head, and you can't stop imagining what it would be like to be with them. At first it feels exciting, like butterflies in your stomach, but soon it can turn into something overwhelming. Suddenly you're checking your phone every 2 minutes to see if they texted back. You're overanalyzing their tone, their emojis, even how long it took them to reply. That intense, obsessive state is called limerence. Limerence isn't just liking someone, it's a full-blown fixation. Psychologists describe it as an involuntary emotional state where you feel obsessed with another person, often fueled by uncertainty, like when you're not sure if they like you back. Unlike normal attraction, limerence can feel addictive. Your mood depends on their actions. If they smile at you, you feel like you're on top of the world. If they ignore you, it feels like the end of everything. The problem is that limerence can become exhausting. It steals your focus, drains your energy, and leaves you feeling powerless. That's where limerence regulation comes in, the skill of calming down that obsessive energy and taking back control of your emotions. Let's break it down with an example. Imagine Emma has a co-worker named David. At first, she just finds him attractive, but soon she starts thinking about him constantly. Every small interaction, like him holding the door for her, feels loaded with meaning. Did he smile differently today? Does that mean he likes her? She begins daydreaming during work, checking his social media late at night, and waiting anxiously for any sign of attention. Before she realizes it, her entire emotional world is tied to David. This is limerence. So how can Emma regulate this? Step 1 is awareness. She needs to recognize that limerence isn't the same as love. It's not about deep compatibility, it's about obsession fueled by uncertainty. Just knowing this can be freeing because it helps her understand her feelings aren't proof of destiny, they're a psychological state. Step 2 is challenging idealization. Limerence thrives on putting the other person on a pedestal, imagining they're perfect. Emma might catch herself thinking David is flawless, but in reality, no one is. By actively reminding herself of his imperfections, maybe he interrupts people at meetings, maybe he's always late, she begins to break the illusion. Seeing the person realistically weakens the obsession. Step 3 is limiting exposure. Limerence feeds on constant contact, checking their social media, replaying conversations, daydreaming. Every little piece of information keeps the obsession alive. By reducing how often she checks David's online presence or interacts unnecessarily, Emma starves the cycle. Without constant fuel, the fire of limerence begins to burn out. Step 4 is redirecting energy. Instead of pouring all that emotional energy into obsessing about David, Emma can invest in herself, picking up hobbies, focusing on personal goals, spending time with supportive friends. This not only distracts her mind, but also rebuilds her sense of self outside of the fixation. Finally, step 5 is reframing the emotions. Instead of thinking, "This obsession means he's my soulmate," Emma can remind herself, "These intense feelings are just my brain's response to uncertainty. It feels powerful, but it's not permanent." By reframing, she shifts from desperation to curiosity, allowing the intensity to fade naturally. The truth about limerence is that it's less about love and more about addiction to hope and uncertainty. Real love grows slowly, with stability and balance. Limerence, on the other hand, thrives on highs and lows, moments of excitement followed by crushing doubt. Regulating it means stepping out of the roller coaster and reclaiming steady ground. Here's the takeaway. If you've ever been trapped in obsessive thoughts about someone, you're not broken, you're human. Your brain is wired to crave certainty, and when it doesn't have it, it gets stuck on overdrive. But by recognizing limerence, challenging the fantasy, limiting triggers, and focusing on your own life, you can regulate those feelings. In the end, limerence regulation isn't about killing attraction. It's about regaining balance. It's about shifting from obsession to clarity, so you can choose relationships that are healthy, mutual, and truly fulfilling. Self-distancing language. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to give calm, logical advice to a friend? But when you're dealing with your own problems, emotions take over, and everything feels complicated. This is because when we face our own struggles, we're too close to them. We see the problem through the lens of fear, stress, or self-doubt. But psychology has found a clever trick to step back and see things more clearly. It's called self-distancing language. The idea is simple. Instead of talking to yourself using I or me, you use your own name or third-person language. For example, instead of thinking, "I'm so nervous about this job interview. What if I mess up?" You would say, "Sarah is nervous about her interview, but Sarah has prepared and can handle it." It might sound strange at first, but this small shift creates a surprising effect. It gives you the same emotional distance you'd have when advising someone else. Why does this work? Because your brain treats the problem differently when it doesn't feel like it belongs directly to you. Using your name tricks your mind into stepping outside of the emotional chaos. Suddenly, you're not just the overwhelmed person inside the problem, you're also the calm observer who can see the bigger picture. Think of it like being both the actor in a movie and the director watching from the outside. When you only use I, you're stuck in the role, feeling every bit of anxiety and stress. But when you switch to third-person language, you become the director too, able to step back and guide yourself with clarity. This technique has been tested in studies. Researchers found that people who used self-distancing language when reflecting on emotional situations felt less anxious, made better decisions, and handled stress more effectively. Their brains even showed less activity in areas linked to distress. It's like flipping a switch. It's from panic to problem solving. Here's a practical example. Imagine Alex is in the middle of an argument with his partner. His emotions are boiling, and he feels the urge to say something hurtful. Normally he'd think, "I'm so angry, I can't control myself." But if he pauses and shifts to self-distancing, he might think, "Alex feels angry right now. But what can Alex say to fix this?" Instead of making it worse. That little pause can prevent a fight from spiraling and lead to a calmer resolution. Another example. Let's say you're about to give a big presentation at work. Instead of spiraling into, "I'm going to embarrass myself," try, "Jessica is about to give her presentation, and Jessica has worked hard. She knows her material." The moment you do this, the fear doesn't vanish completely, but it shrinks. You see yourself as capable, just like you would see a friend. Self-distancing language is like borrowing wisdom from your future self. It allows you to step out of the storm of emotions and think clearly, almost as if you're someone else's advisor. The next time you feel overwhelmed, try this trick. Don't just say, "I'm stressed." Say, "Your name is stressed, but your name has handled challenges before." It feels small, but the impact is big. It turns confusion into clarity and transforms panic into perspective. The lesson here is simple. Sometimes the best way to solve your own problems is to stop talking to yourself like you're you. Instead, step back. Use your name and guide yourself like a trusted friend. Reciprocal silence. We've all experienced this. You're in the middle of a conversation and suddenly there's a pause. The other person stops talking and the silence stretches longer than feels comfortable. Inside you start to panic a little. Should I say something? Do they expect me to respond? This is awkward. And before you know it, you're blurting out details you hadn't planned to share. That discomfort you feel isn't just random. It's a natural part of human psychology. And when used intentionally, it becomes a powerful technique called reciprocal silence. At its core, reciprocal silence is the act of deliberately using silence to encourage the other person to keep talking. Humans are wired to fill empty space in conversation. Silence feels like tension, and most people can't resist breaking it. Skilled communicators, like negotiators, therapists, and even interrogators, use this instinct to their advantage. They let silence hang in the air, knowing the other person will often reveal more than they intended, just to escape the discomfort. Let's imagine an example in everyday life. Lisa is a negotiator working on a business deal. Her client says, "This is the lowest price I can offer." Instead of immediately countering, Lisa simply nods and stays quiet. She holds steady eye contact but doesn't say a word. At first, the client is confident, but as the seconds tick by, he starts to feel uneasy. Why isn't she saying anything? Did I push too hard? Maybe I should add something else. And so he breaks the silence. Well, maybe I can adjust the price a little if that helps. Without saying a single word, Lisa gained an advantage. This doesn't just work in business. Imagine you're talking with a friend about something personal. They say, "Yeah, things have been okay." If you immediately jump in with a new question, they might brush off their feelings. But if you pause, give them space without rushing to fill it, the silence becomes an invitation. After a moment, your friend might continue, "Well, actually, I've been struggling with something, but I didn't know how to bring it up." By staying silent, you created a safe space for them to open up. So why does silence feel so powerful? It comes down to our social instincts. Humans are naturally uncomfortable with unresolved tension. We're taught that conversations should flow, so when silence appears, we feel pressure to restore balance. This pressure is what drives people to share more than they normally would. But here's the key. Reciprocal silence only works when used with intention. If the silence feels hostile or awkward, it can backfire. The trick is to make it feel calm, patient, and supportive. It's not about staring someone down, it's about giving them space. Think of it less like a weapon and more like an open door, inviting the other person to step through. One of the best places to see this in action is therapy. Good therapists don't constantly fill the air with questions. Sometimes they simply nod and wait. That silence gently pushes clients to go deeper, revealing thoughts and feelings they might have held back otherwise. It's not manipulation. It's creating room for honesty. You can also use reciprocal silence in daily conversations. For example, when someone answers your question with a short, vague response, don't immediately move on. Pause. Wait. Let them decide if they want to add more. During a negotiation, don't rush to counteroffer. Stay silent. Often the other side will adjust their position first. When comforting someone, resist the urge to fill every gap with words. Sometimes silence communicates more support than talking. The beauty of reciprocal silence is that it teaches you the power of not speaking. We live in a world that rewards fast talkers, but silence can be even stronger. It builds trust, encourages honesty, and reveals truths hidden beneath the surface. So next time you feel that awkward pause, don't panic. Embrace it. Instead of rushing to fill the space, hold steady and see what happens. You might be surprised by how much people are willing to share when given the gift of silence. Einstellung Effect. Have you ever faced a problem that seemed tricky, but instead of trying something new, you automatically went with the first solution that popped into your mind, even if it wasn't the best one? That mental shortcut is something we all do, and psychologists call it the Einstellung Effect. The term Einstellung comes from German, meaning attitude or approach. It describes how our brains often get stuck on familiar solutions, even when better options are right in front of us. In other words, we can become blind to creative answers because we're so used to solving problems in the same old way. This effect was first studied in the 1940s using puzzles. Psychologist Abraham Luchins gave people a series of math problems involving pitchers of water. For the first few, there was a complicated formula to solve them. After practicing, participants got good at using that formula. But then Luchins gave them a simpler problem, one that could be solved with a much easier method. Instead of switching to the simpler solution, most people stuck with the complicated formula they had practiced earlier. Their past success had trapped them. Now, think about how often this happens in real life. Imagine a mechanic who always fixes cars a certain way. One day, a new problem comes along that could be solved faster with a different tool. But instead of adapting, the mechanic spends hours using the old method because it's the one he trusts. Or picture a student solving math problems. She's learned one formula so well that she applies it everywhere, even when a shortcut exists. The Einstellung effect isn't just about math or mechanics. It affects all of us, every day. Have you ever struggled with a new piece of technology? Instead of exploring new options, you stick to the way you used to do things, even if it's clunky. Or maybe at work, your team handles tasks the way it's always been done. Even though a fresh approach could save time and money. That's the Einstellung effect in action, habit and familiarity blocking innovation. So why do our brains fall into this trap? It comes from efficiency. Our brains like shortcuts. Once we learn a solution that works, it gets locked in as our go-to. Normally that's helpful. It saves time. But the downside is that it can blind us to better possibilities. It's like driving down the same road every day. Even if a new, faster road opens, you might still take the old one out of habit, never noticing the upgrade. The danger of the Einstellung effect is that it limits creativity and problem-solving. Imagine an entrepreneur trying to grow their business. They've always relied on word-of-mouth marketing, so they keep pouring energy into it. But maybe social media could multiply their reach. Stuck in their old mindset, they miss the opportunity. So how do you break free from this mental trap? One strategy is to practice beginner's mind. Pretend you're seeing the problem for the first time, even if you've solved something similar before. Ask yourself, if I had no experience here, how would I approach this? That mindset opens the door to fresh solutions. Another strategy is to deliberately brainstorm multiple options before acting. Instead of jumping on the first idea, pause and ask, what are 3 other ways I could solve this? Even if your first idea still ends up being the best, the process forces you to consider alternatives. You can also challenge your assumptions. Ask, am I doing this because it's the best way, or just because it's the way I've always done it? That simple question can uncover hidden habits holding you back. The Einstellung effect reminds us that experience can be both a blessing and a curse. Experience gives us confidence and skill, but it can also trap us in patterns that limit our growth. The people who thrive are the ones who balance experience with curiosity. Those who know when to rely on what works and when to throw out the old playbook and try something new. So the next time you feel stuck, remember, maybe the problem isn't as hard as it looks. Maybe the answer is simpler, but your brain is too busy clinging to old solutions. Step back, clear your mental slate, and look again with fresh eyes. You might be surprised at how much easier life gets when you free yourself from the Einstellung effect. Deflection mirroring. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone asked you a tough question and you didn't want to answer directly? Maybe they asked, "So, when are you finally getting married?" Or, "Why didn't you finish that project on time?" In those moments, you probably felt a little trapped. If you answer honestly, you might feel exposed. If you dodge the question, it looks suspicious. But there's a subtle technique people use, often without realizing it, that can smoothly shift the focus back without raising tension. This is called deflection mirroring. The idea is simple. Instead of answering directly, you reflect the question back in a way that puts the spotlight on the other person. It's like holding up a conversational mirror. By doing this, you deflect attention away from yourself while keeping the conversation flowing naturally. For example, imagine you're at a family dinner and your uncle asks, "So, when are you going to settle down and buy a house?" Instead of fumbling for an answer, you smile and say, "That's a good question. When did you feel ready to buy your first house?" Suddenly, the conversation shifts. Your uncle starts talking about his own experience, and the pressure on you disappears. You haven't lied, you haven't argued, you simply mirrored the question back. This works because people love to talk about themselves. By reflecting their curiosity, you redirect the spotlight in a way that feels natural. They walk away satisfied that they had a meaningful conversation, while you escape from giving an uncomfortable answer. Deflection mirroring can also be useful in professional settings. Imagine you're in a job interview and the interviewer asks a tough question like, "Why do you think you failed in your last role?" Instead of panicking, you might respond with something like, "That's interesting. How does this company usually view challenges with?" Hence, someone struggles in a role. This turns the question into a discussion and buys you time to shape your response more thoughtfully. Another powerful use is in conflict situations. Let's say someone accuses you, "You never listen to me." Instead of getting defensive, you can mirror it gently. "It sounds like you feel unheard. Can you tell me more about when that happens?" Now, instead of escalating the fight, you're deflecting and creating space for dialogue. The tension cools down because you're shifting from defense to curiosity. But here's the key. Deflection mirroring works best when it's subtle. If you overuse it, people might feel like you're dodging everything. It's not about avoiding responsibility. It's about managing moments where direct answers aren't helpful. Think of it as a conversational judo move. Instead of meeting force with force, you redirect it smoothly. Why does this work so well? It taps into two powerful psychological forces. The desire to be heard. People naturally want to share their experiences. When you reflect a question back, they feel valued and validated. The relief of tension. Awkward or confrontational questions create stress. Mirroring releases that stress by gently shifting the emotional burden back to the asker. You've probably seen great communicators use this without realizing it. Skilled politicians, for example, are experts at deflection mirroring. A reporter asks a direct, uncomfortable question, and instead of answering, the politician pivots. That's an important issue. What do you think matters most to the public here? The question bounces away, and the conversation keeps flowing. In daily life, you can use deflection mirroring to protect your privacy, handle nosy questions, or de-escalate conflicts. The trick is to do it with warmth and curiosity so it doesn't come off as cold or evasive. Here are some easy templates you can use. "That's a great question. How did you handle it when you faced something similar?" "Interesting point. What's your perspective on that?" "I'm curious. What would you do in that situation?" These little shifts move the focus away from you and keep the other person engaged. The beauty of deflection mirroring is that it gives you control without confrontation. Instead of being cornered, you gracefully turn the spotlight around. You protect your boundaries, guide the flow of conversation, and leave others feeling like they were truly heard. So the next time someone puts you on the spot, don't panic. Take a breath, hold up that conversational mirror, and let them carry the conversation forward. You'll be surprised how powerful silence, curiosity, and redirection can be when used together. Narrative bias. Exploitation. Humans love stories. From childhood fairy tales to blockbuster movies, our brains are wired to understand the world through narrative. Stories give events meaning, connect emotions to facts, and make complicated information easier to digest. But this love of stories also creates a blind spot, what psychologists call narrative bias. We're more likely to believe information if it's wrapped in a story, even if the story isn't fully accurate. And when people intentionally use this weakness, it becomes narrative bias, exploitation. Think about advertising. A company could just tell you, our product removes stains effectively. That's straightforward, but forgettable. Instead, they show you a mother struggling to clean her kid's messy shirt. She tries everything, but nothing works, until she discovers their product. Suddenly, her stress turns into relief. That story makes the product more memorable and persuasive. You're not just buying soap. You're buying the happy ending of that little story. Politicians do the same thing. Instead of overwhelming audiences with statistics, they tell a single powerful story. I met a man named John, who works 2 jobs and still can't afford health care. The story is more persuasive than 1,000 data points because it makes the issue personal. Even if John is just one example, people believe the story represents the bigger truth. Why does narrative bias work so well? Because stories engage both emotion and imagination. When we hear a story, our brains don't just process words, we actually simulate the experience. If someone tells you about running through the rain, your brain activates similar pathways as if you were running through the rain yourself. This mental simulation makes stories stick in our memory and feel more real than plain facts. But here's the problem. This bias can be exploited. A story doesn't have to be true to feel convincing. A rumor, a half-truth, or a manipulated anecdote can spread faster than boring statistics. That's why fake news often goes viral. It tells a dramatic story that feels emotionally satisfying, even if it's false. So, how can you protect yourself from narrative bias exploitation? The first step is awareness. Whenever you feel strongly moved by a story, whether it's in an ad, a political speech, or even a social media post, pause and ask, am I reacting to the facts or just the story? Separating the emotional pull from the actual evidence helps you see more clearly. On the flip side, you can use this principle positively. If you want to persuade others, whether you're teaching, giving a presentation, or motivating a team, don't just share numbers. Wrap the facts in a story. Give people a character to connect with and a journey to follow. The story makes the message memorable, but the facts give it credibility. Narrative bias shows us that humans aren't purely logical creatures. We don't just process data, we live through stories. And while this makes us vulnerable to manipulation, it also gives us a powerful tool for connection and influence. The key is balance. Respect the power of stories, but never let them blind you to the truth behind them. Cognitive reframing. Life constantly throws challenges at us. Stressful jobs, tough relationships, unexpected failures. And often, what makes these challenges feel unbearable isn't the event itself, but the meaning we attach to it. 2 people can face the exact same situation, but one falls apart while the other finds strength. What makes the difference? Very often, it's the skill of cognitive reframing. Cognitive reframing is the ability to shift the way you interpret a situation. It doesn't mean denying reality or pretending everything is fine when it isn't. Instead, it's about looking at the same event from a different perspective, changing the story you tell yourself about what happened. And when you change the story, you change the emotion that comes with it. Think about it like this. Imagine you miss out on a job opportunity you really wanted. The first frame might be, I failed. I'm not good enough. I'll never succeed. That interpretation brings feelings of shame and hopelessness, but reframing it could sound like, this wasn't the right role for me. I gained valuable interview experience, and now I know how to improve for the next one. The facts haven't changed. You still didn't get the job. But the emotional weight shifts from despair to motivation. Psychologists first studied this in the context of therapy. People with anxiety or depression often get trapped in negative thought cycles, interpreting events in the harshest way possible. By practicing reframing, They learn to soften those interpretations and see possibilities instead of dead ends. For example, instead of thinking, "Everyone ignored me at the party, I must be boring," a reframe could be, "People were just busy talking to old friends. I'll try again with someone new next time." Same event, new story, new outcome. Cognitive reframing is powerful because it teaches us that our thoughts aren't facts. They're just interpretations, and interpretations can be changed. Let's look at a practical example. Imagine you're stuck in traffic on the way to work. The default frame is frustration. "This is wasting my time. I'm going to be late. My whole day is ruined." But reframing could sound like, "This gives me extra time to listen to that audiobook I've been meaning to finish." Or, "This is a chance to practice patience." Suddenly the stress transforms into something manageable. This doesn't mean reframing magically makes problems disappear. If you lose someone you love, for example, you can't just reframe away the pain. But even in grief, reframing can help. Instead of only focusing on loss, some people choose to frame it as carrying forward the lessons and love that person gave them. The pain is still there, but the meaning becomes healing rather than crushing. Reframing can also be used in conflict. Let's say your partner snaps at you after a long day. The first frame might be, "They don't respect me, they're always so rude." That fuels anger. But reframing could be, "They're exhausted. This isn't about me. It's about the stress they're under." Instead of escalating the fight, the reframe opens space for compassion. Athletes often use reframing to boost performance. Before a big competition, nerves can feel overwhelming, but instead of telling themselves, "I'm nervous, I can't handle this," they reframe it as, "This adrenaline means my body is ready. I'm excited, not scared." Same physical sensations, racing heart, sweaty palms, but a totally different mindset. Here's the key. Reframing doesn't mean lying to yourself. It means choosing the most empowering angle on reality. Imagine holding a picture frame. The picture is the same, but if you tilt the frame, the whole image looks different. That's what reframing does for your mind. So how do you practice it? Notice your automatic thoughts. Pay attention to the first story your brain tells you when something goes wrong. Challenge it. Ask, "Is this the only way to see it? What else could this mean?" Rewrite the frame. Choose a perspective that helps you grow, learn, or stay calm, instead of one that drags you down. Over time, reframing becomes a habit. Instead of spiraling into negativity, your brain learns to flip challenges into opportunities. The lesson of cognitive reframing is simple but life-changing. You don't always control what happens to you, but you do control the story you tell yourself about it. And often, that story makes all the difference between staying stuck and moving forward. Anchoring reset. Have you ever noticed how the very first piece of information you hear can shape everything that comes after it? Imagine you're shopping for a new phone. The first one you see is priced at $200. Suddenly, when you see another one for $800, it feels like a bargain, even though $800 is still a lot of money. This mental shortcut is called anchoring, and it's one of the most powerful biases in human decision-making. But here's the twist. Just as anchors can trap us, we can also reset them. That's where the idea of an anchoring reset comes in. Anchoring happens because our brains love shortcuts. Instead of carefully weighing every possibility, we latch on to the first number, idea, or impression we see, and then compare everything else to it. In negotiations, shopping, even relationships, that first impression becomes the anchor. The problem? Anchors aren't always accurate. They can be manipulated, or they can simply be irrelevant. Think of a car dealership. A salesperson might start by showing you the most expensive model first. You gasp at the price, say $40,000. Now, when they show you a $30,000 car, it feels reasonable, even though $30,000 might still be above your budget. The anchor, $40,000, distorted your sense of value. But here's where the anchoring reset comes in. You can consciously shift the anchor in your own mind, or in someone else's. Instead of letting the first piece of information control the narrative, you create a new reference point. Let's say you're negotiating your salary. The company opens with an offer of $50,000. If you accept that as the anchor, every counteroffer will feel like stretching from that number. But what if you reset the anchor? Instead of responding directly, you say, based on market research and the value I bring, I was expecting something closer to $65,000. Suddenly the frame shifts. Now the negotiation revolves. Surround your anchor, not theirs. This reset can also happen internally. Imagine you've been telling yourself, I can only run 2 miles, that's my limit. That belief becomes an anchor. Every run feels hard because you're mentally capped. But if you deliberately reset the anchor, say by focusing on a new goal of 5 miles, or reminding yourself of someone who started small and now runs marathons, you break free from the mental limit. Anchors aren't just external, they live inside us too. The psychology behind anchoring reset is fascinating. Studies show that even random numbers can affect judgment. In one experiment, researchers spun a wheel with random digits in front of participants and then asked them to guess the number of African countries in the UN. People who saw higher numbers on the wheel gave higher estimates, even though the number was meaningless. That's how powerful anchoring is. But the flip side is equally important. If we can be influenced so easily, we can also retrain ourselves to resist it. How do you reset an anchor effectively? Introduce a new reference point. Don't argue against the old number. Replace it with your own. If someone says, this product is $500, you can say, I've seen similar ones for around $300. Instantly, $300 becomes the mental comparison point. Reframe the context. Instead of focusing on raw numbers, shift attention to value, quality, or long-term benefits. This changes how the anchor feels. Pause before deciding. Anchors grab you fastest when you react immediately. By taking a moment to breathe and gather information, you give your brain space to override the first impression. Anchoring resets aren't just useful in negotiations. They can change the way we see our own lives. Many of us anchor our self-worth to early experiences, a bad grade in school, a harsh comment from a parent, a past failure. Those become the anchor that shape how we see ourselves. I'm not smart enough, or I'm not capable. But those anchors don't define reality. They're just starting points. By consciously resetting them, by saying, that was then, but today I'm learning and growing, you create a new baseline for your self-image. The anchoring reset teaches us that first impressions, first offers, and first beliefs aren't destiny. They're just starting points. And with awareness, you don't have to be chained to them. You can shift the frame, create a new anchor, and redefine the way you and others see the situation. So next time you feel boxed in by an initial number, idea, or belief, ask yourself, do I have to accept this anchor, or can I set a new one? Chances are you have more power to reset the frame than you think. Silent authority. When you think of authority, what comes to mind? Maybe a booming voice giving orders, a boss barking instructions, or a teacher demanding attention. We usually connect authority with loudness and force, but psychology shows us something counterintuitive. Sometimes the most powerful authority isn't loud at all. It's quiet. This subtle, commanding presence is called silent authority. Silent authority is when someone influences others not by shouting, arguing, or demanding, but by the weight of their presence, their calm confidence, and the way they carry themselves. It's the kind of authority that makes people stop, listen, and respect, without a single raised voice. Think about a time when a room went quiet the moment someone walked in, not because they yelled, but because their energy commanded respect. That's silent authority. It's not about intimidation. It's about unshakable confidence that others naturally notice. One classic example comes from classrooms. Imagine two teachers. The first one yells constantly, "Quiet down, pay attention, sit in your seats." The noise may stop temporarily, but the students don't truly respect them. They just fear the yelling. The second teacher, however, enters calmly, stands silently at the front of the room, and waits. The silence spreads, one student at a time, until the whole class is focused. Without raising their voice, this teacher has more control. That's the power of silent authority. Why does this work? Humans are wired to read subtle cues of confidence and leadership. Loudness can sometimes signal insecurity, as if the person is trying too hard to prove themselves. Calmness, on the other hand, signals certainty. It says, "I don't need to force you. My presence is enough." Think of leaders like Nelson Mandela or Mahatma Gandhi. They didn't rely on shouting to inspire people. Instead, their calm, grounded presence carried enormous weight. Even in silence, their authority was undeniable. In contrast, leaders who constantly shout or push often lose respect over time. Their authority feels forced instead of natural. Silent authority shows up in everyday life too. Imagine you're in a heated argument. One person is shouting, waving their arms, trying to dominate. The other person listens quietly, maintains eye contact, and only speaks when necessary. Who seems more powerful? Surprisingly, it's often the quiet one. Their composure makes the other person look out of control. This principle is also used in negotiations. A skilled negotiator knows the power of silence. Instead of rushing to fill every pause with words, they wait. The silence itself becomes pressure. The other side often speaks first, revealing more than they intended. The negotiator's quiet confidence shifts the balance of power. So how can you cultivate silent authority in your own life? Control your body language. Stand tall, make steady eye contact, and move with intention. People notice posture more than words. Use pauses wisely. Don't rush to respond. Silence before speaking makes your words carry more weight. Stay calm under pressure. When everyone else panics, your composure becomes leadership. People follow the one who looks steady. Speak less, but with clarity. The fewer words you use, the more people pay attention when you finally speak. Silent authority isn't about being passive. It's about projecting strength without noise. It's knowing that power isn't proven through volume. It's shown through presence. The lesson here is simple. People respect calm confidence more than loud dominance. You don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes the quietest person in the room holds the most authority. So next time you feel pressure to prove yourself, resist the urge to go louder. Instead, ground yourself. End silence, hold steady eye contact, and let your calm presence do the work. That's the true art of silent authority. Sympathy fatigue. We all want to be compassionate people. When someone we care about is hurting, we naturally want to listen, comfort, and help. But have you ever noticed that after a while, constantly dealing with other people's struggles starts to wear you down? At first, you're full of empathy and patience. But after weeks, months, or even years of carrying the emotional weight of others, you start to feel drained. You care, but it's exhausting. This emotional burnout has a name: sympathy fatigue. Sympathy fatigue is what happens when constant exposure to someone else's pain starts to numb your ability to respond with the same energy and compassion you once had. It's not that you've become cold or heartless. It's that your emotional reserves are running low. Just like physical energy, emotional energy has limits. If you spend it all without recharging, you hit a wall. This is especially common in caregivers, therapists, doctors, nurses, teachers, and parents. Imagine a nurse working in an emergency room. On the first day, every patient's story feels heartbreaking. She feels the weight of their pain and desperately wants to help. But after months of long shifts, hearing tragedy after tragedy, her emotional responses become muted. It's not because she doesn't care, it's because she has absorbed so much suffering that her heart feels heavy and tired. That's sympathy fatigue. But it's not just professionals. Everyday people experience it too. Maybe you have a friend who always calls you when they're upset. At first, you gladly listen and offer support. But after months of hearing the same problems with no changes, You notice yourself sighing when their name pops up on your phone. You don't want to feel annoyed. You want to help. But you can't summon the same compassion anymore. That's sympathy fatigue creeping in. Why does this happen? Because our brains and hearts have limits. Its empathy is like a muscle. If you overuse it without rest, it gets tired. And when you're constantly faced with other people's emotions, especially pain, it begins to overwhelm your system. Instead of feeling compassion, you start to shut down as a form of self-protection. The danger of sympathy fatigue is that it can lead to guilt. You might think, why can't I just be more patient? Why am I tired of helping? Am I a bad person? But the truth is, this isn't about being selfish. It's about being human. Everyone has emotional limits. So how do you manage sympathy fatigue? The first step is awareness. Recognize when your compassion is running low. If you feel irritable, numb, or emotionally distant when helping others, that's a signal your reserves need replenishing. The second step is boundaries. It's okay to say no sometimes. You don't have to be the emotional rock for everyone all the time. Healthy boundaries protect your energy, so you can actually continue to care in the long run. Think of it like recharging a phone. You can't keep giving energy if your own battery is at 1%. The third step is self-care. Find activities that restore you emotionally, whether it's journaling, spending time in nature, exercising, or just laughing with friends. Compassion fatigue grows when you only give and never receive. Refilling your emotional cup makes it possible to keep giving without burning out. And finally, practice self-compassion. Remind yourself that feeling drained doesn't mean you don't care. It means you're human. Even therapists who are trained to listen every day have to take breaks and seek their own support to avoid burnout. The truth is, sympathy fatigue isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you've been giving deeply. It shows your empathy is strong enough to be stretched to its limits. The key is learning to balance compassion for others with compassion for you, yourself. So next time you notice your patience running thin or your empathy fading, don't beat yourself up. Take it as a reminder. You deserve care too. By protecting your own energy, you'll not only recover from sympathy fatigue, but also be able to show up again for others with genuine kindness, without the exhaustion. Ambiguity. Amplification. Uncertainty is uncomfortable. As humans, we crave clarity. We want to know where we stand, what's coming next, and what others think of us. But here's the twist. Sometimes, when people don't give us answers, our minds don't just sit quietly. Instead, they take that uncertainty and amplify it, turning small unknowns into huge stories. This psychological phenomenon is called ambiguity amplification. At its core, ambiguity amplification happens when our brains overreact to unclear situations. A tiny gap in information grows into a storm of assumptions, anxieties, and overthinking. We don't like blank spaces, so we fill them in, even if we're wrong. Take texting as an example. You send someone a message, "Hey, want to hang out later?" They read it, but don't respond for hours. What happens in your head? At first you think, maybe they're busy. But as time passes, your brain starts spinning. Are they mad at me? Did I say something wrong? Do they not want to be friends anymore? By the time they reply with a casual, "Sorry, I was in a meeting," you've already built an entire drama in your mind. That's ambiguity amplification, your brain taking silence and turning it into noise. This effect shows up in relationships all the time. Imagine you're dating someone new. They tell you, "I had a great time tonight," but don't text the next day. Suddenly you start overanalyzing every word, every pause, every emoji they used the night before. The ambiguity of not knowing their feelings gets amplified into hours of overthinking. Marketers and politicians also use ambiguity amplification on purpose. For example, a vague advertisement might say, "Something big is coming. Are you ready?" That ambiguity sparks curiosity. Your brain fills in the blank. What is it? Why does it matter? Should I be excited? The mystery makes you more engaged than a clear explanation ever would. Similarly, in politics, a leader might use vague promises like, "We'll create a better future," without saying how. The ambiguity lets everyone project their own hopes onto the statement. The lack of clarity actually increases influence. So, why does our brain do this? It comes down to survival instincts. In ancient times, ambiguity meant danger. If you heard a rustle in the bushes, your brain couldn't just say, "Oh well, probably nothing." It had to assume the worst. What if it's a predator? Because that caution increased your chances of survival. Even today, our brains are wired to treat uncertainty as a threat, which is why we amplify it so quickly. The problem is that in modern life, most ambiguity isn't life-threatening. It's emotional. A late text, a vague comment, a missed call. Yet our brain still responds with the same overdrive, creating stress and anxiety where none is needed. So how can we handle ambiguity amplification? Pause before filling in the blanks. When you notice yourself spiraling, ask, "Do I actually know this is true, or am I making it up?" Look for multiple explanations. Instead of jumping to the worst-case scenario, force yourself to list at least 3 possible reasons. For example, if your boss hasn't replied to your email, it could mean they're mad, or it could mean they're busy, or simply haven't checked their inbox yet. Get comfortable with not knowing. This is the hardest step. Instead of rushing to solve every uncertainty, practice sitting with it. Tell yourself, it's okay not to have the answer right now. Over time, this builds resilience. Interestingly, ambiguity amplification can also be used positively. Think about storytelling. A thriller movie that hides the villain until the very end makes your imagination run wild. The ambiguity pulls you in and keeps you hooked. Writers, leaders, and communicators can use controlled ambiguity to spark curiosity and engagement, while making sure it doesn't become destructive. The big lesson here is that our brains hate uncertainty, so they exaggerate it. But when we recognize this pattern, we can stop letting our minds turn silence into noise. We can replace fear with patience and overthinking with curiosity. So the next time you're stuck wondering why someone hasn't texted back or stressing about what a vague comment meant, remind yourself, this is ambiguity amplification at work. The situation isn't necessarily bad. It's just your brain filling in blanks with its loudest story. And once you see it for what it is, you take back control. Loss aversion leverage. Imagine this. You're given 2 choices. Option 1, you gain $100. Option 2, you avoid losing $100. Most people think they'd feel the same either way, but here's the surprising truth. Research shows that losing something feels about twice as powerful as gaining the same thing. In other words, the pain of loss hits us harder than the joy of gain. This deep psychological quirk is called loss aversion, and when people understand it, they can use it as a powerful influence tool, something we call loss aversion leverage. Loss aversion was first studied by psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, who found that humans are naturally risk-averse. We'd rather avoid losses than chase gains. For example, if I offered you a 50-50 gamble, heads, you win $100, tails, you lose $100, most people would say no, even though the odds are perfectly balanced. The reason? The fear of loss outweighs the thrill of gain. Marketers and negotiators have been using this for decades. Instead of saying, "Buy our product and you'll gain X," they flip it. "If you don't buy this, you'll miss out on X." That little shift in framing hits harder. For example, "Sign up today and earn rewards" sounds good, but "don't miss out on these rewards" feels urgent. Same deal, different framing, but the second one triggers loss aversion. Here's a classic real-life scenario. Gyms often offer free trials for a week. At first, it's framed as a gain. You're getting something for free. But by the end of the week, it shifts. If you don't sign up, you're losing access to the workouts, the atmosphere, and the progress you've started. That sense of loss motivates people to pull out their wallets more than the promise of gains ever could. Loss aversion leverage is also common in relationships. Think of someone who says, "If you don't appreciate me, you'll lose me." That statement has more import than, "If you appreciate me, you'll keep me." The fear of losing something valuable pushes people to act. So why is loss so powerful? Evolution. For our ancestors, losing food, tools, or safety could mean death. Gaining something was good, but losing something was devastating. Our brains still carry that wiring today, even though most modern losses aren't life-threatening. That's why losing $20 feels worse than finding $20 feels good, or why canceling a subscription feels harder than signing up in the first place. But here's where it gets interesting. You can use loss aversion leverage not just to persuade others, but also to motivate yourself. For example, instead of saying, "I want to gain health by exercising," you can reframe it as, "If I skip workouts, I'll lose the progress I've already made." That loss-based framing makes you less likely to give up. Some people even use commitment contracts where they put money on the line. If they fail their goal, they lose it. The fear of loss pushes them to stay consistent. Of course, loss aversion can be exploited too. Scammers often use phrases like, "Act now or lose your chance forever." They create artificial urgency to hijack your brain's loss sensitivity. That's why awareness is key. The moment you hear "don't miss out" or "last chance," ask yourself, am I making this decision because it's truly valuable? Or just because I don't want to lose? Here's how you can practice loss aversion leverage wisely. Frame goals around protection. Instead of only thinking about what you'll gain, think about what you'll lose if you quit. Use it in negotiations. If you're selling something, highlight what the other person risks losing by walking away. Beware of manipulation. Recognize when marketers are playing on your loss aversion so you don't make rushed choices. The lesson is clear. Humans don't make decisions based only on logic. We make them based on emotion. And nothing hits our emotions harder than the fear of losing something we value. So next time you want to influence yourself or others, remember, gains feel good, but losses feel unforgettable. By understanding loss aversion and learning to reset how it frames our choices, you hold the leverage to guide decisions with far more power than persuasion alone. Temporal discounting override. Imagine you're given two options. Option 1, you can have $100 today. Option 2, you can have $150 if you wait 3 months. Which one would you choose? Most people go for the $100 today, even though logically, waiting gives them more money. This tendency to choose smaller immediate rewards over larger delayed ones is called temporal discounting. Our brains discount the value of the future compared to the present. But here's the exciting part. With the right mindset, you can override it. Temporal discounting is deeply wired into human psychology. Thousands of years ago, our ancestors couldn't afford to wait for rewards. If you had food available now, you ate it. Waiting for something uncertain in the future could mean starvation. That survival instinct stuck with us, even though modern life rewards long-term thinking. Saving money, studying for years, building healthy habits, these all require delaying gratification. Yet our brains keep pulling us toward the quick fix. A famous study, the marshmallow experiment, showed this clearly. Children were given a marshmallow and told they could eat it now or wait 15 minutes and get 2 marshmallows. Most kids ate it right away. Only a few waited. And years later, researchers found those kids tended to do better in school, careers, and relationships. They weren't smarter. They just had better tools for overriding temporal discounting. In real life, temporal discounting shows up everywhere. You know saving for retirement is important, but buying something new today feels better. You know exercising will improve your health long term, but the couch is so inviting right now. You know studying today will pay off later, but scrolling social media gives instant satisfaction. So how do we override this bias? Psychologists have found several strategies that trick the brain into valuing the future more. 1. Make the future feel real. Our brains struggle with abstract future rewards. So instead of saying, "I'll be healthier in 10 years, imagine, 10 years from now, I want to play soccer with my kids without being exhausted." The more vivid and personal the future feels, the less discounted it becomes. Break big goals into small wins. Waiting 5 years for a reward feels impossible. But if you break it into smaller steps, like saving $50 this week or exercising for just 10 minutes today, your brain gets a taste of reward right away. You trick yourself into both short-term and long-term satisfaction. 3. Use commitment devices. Sometimes you can lock in your future self by setting consequences. For example, you might put money into an account that you can't touch until retirement, or sign up for a class you've already paid for. The pain of losing that investment pushes you to follow through. So, flip the frame. Instead of thinking, "I'm giving up pleasure now for the future," think, "If I give in now, I'm stealing from my future self." This reframing makes the cost of impulsive choices feel heavier. Here's a real-life example. Sarah wants to get in shape, but she keeps skipping workouts because Netflix is more tempting. Temporal discounting tells her, "Enjoy the couch now, worry about health later." To override it, she makes her future vivid. She pictures herself running a 5K with her friends in 6 months, feeling strong and confident. She also sets small daily goals. Just 15 minutes of exercise instead of a full hour. Suddenly, the future reward feels closer and the short-term sacrifice feels smaller. Another example. David struggles with money. Every time he saves, he ends up spending it on little luxuries. So he sets up an automatic transfer that puts part of his paycheck into a locked savings account he can't access easily. Now, he doesn't have to rely on willpower. He's overridden temporal discounting with structure. The truth is, our brains will always lean toward instant gratification. That's human nature. But we can outsmart that wiring by changing how we view time and rewards. Temporal discounting override isn't about being superhuman. It's about using tricks and systems to make the future feel just as real and valuable as the present. Once you master it, you unlock one of the greatest superpowers in life, the ability to sacrifice small pleasures today for life-changing rewards tomorrow. So the next time you're tempted to take the easy win now, pause and ask, "What would my future self thank me for?" That simple question might be the reset you need to override your brain's bias and choose the path that leads to long-term success. False choice framing. Have you ever been in a situation where you were given 2 options and you felt like you had to pick one, even though neither really fit what you wanted? That's the trick of false choice framing. It's when someone presents limited options in a way that makes you believe those are the only possibilities, even though many other options exist. It's a classic psychological influence strategy. By narrowing the frame, people guide your decision without you realizing you've been cornered. You think you're making a free choice, but really, you're choosing from a box someone else built for you. A simple example is when a parent asks a child, "Do you want to do your homework before dinner or after dinner?" The child feels empowered because they get to choose. But notice, not doing homework was never an option. The parent framed the choice so that either way, the outcome, doing homework, was guaranteed. The freedom is an illusion. Salespeople use false choice framing all the time. Imagine you're at a clothing store and the salesperson asks, "Would you like to pay with cash or card today?" The assumption hidden inside that question is that you're buying something. The real choice, "Do I want to buy this at all?" has been subtly removed. By presenting 2 harmless-looking options, they nudge you into a decision you might not have made otherwise. Another example is in politics. A politician might say, "Do you want higher taxes, or do you want poor infrastructure?" That framing makes it seem like those are the only 2 options, ignoring possibilities like budget reform, better spending efficiency, or alternative funding. By limiting the frame, they shape how people think. Why does false choice framing work so well? Because our brains like clarity. Too many options can overwhelm us, a phenomenon known as choice overload. When someone gives us 2 or 3 neat opti irons, it feels manageable. We relax thinking, okay, I just need to choose one of these. We rarely pause to ask, wait, are these even the only choices? Psychologists call this a framing effect, where the way information is presented changes the decision. A yes-no choice feels restrictive, but a multiple-choice option feels like freedom, even if all the answers lead to the same place. Here's a more personal example. Imagine you're dating someone, and during an argument they say, so, do you want to break up, or do you want to stop complaining? That's a false choice. It frames the situation as either silence or breakup, when in reality, a third option might be healthier communication and compromise. But in the heat of the moment, you might feel forced into the frame they've given you. The danger of false choice framing is that it limits creativity. When we accept the frame, we stop looking for alternatives outside it. That's why advertisers, politicians, and even everyday people use it. It gives them control of the narrative. So how can you defend yourself against it? The key is to step outside the frame. Whenever you're given a choice, ask, is this the full picture, or just the options someone wants me to see? If it feels too narrow, brainstorm alternatives. For example, when a car dealer says, do you want the basic model or the premium model? You can step outside the frame and say, actually, I want to compare with another dealership first. Suddenly, you've broken free of their box. On the flip side, you can use false choice framing positively in your own life. Parents often use it to guide kids gently. Teachers use it to keep classrooms under control, and managers use it to nudge teams toward productivity. By framing decisions in a limited way, you make overwhelming tasks feel simpler and still give people a sense of agency. The takeaway is this: not all choices are real. Sometimes, the freedom we feel is carefully crafted by someone else. Recognizing false choice framing helps you reclaim true freedom of decision. Instead of asking, which of these options should I pick? Start asking, are these even the right options? Once you see the trick, you'll notice it everywhere, from dinner conversations to marketing emails. And when you do, you'll no longer be boxed in. You'll step outside the frame and see possibilities others might miss. Fear neutralization. Fear is one of the oldest survival tools wired into our brains. It kept our ancestors alive by warning them of predators, danger, and threats. But in today's world, most fears aren't about lions or cliffs. They're about failure, rejection, embarrassment, or loss. And while fear can protect us, it often holds us back. The key to growth isn't eliminating fear completely, but learning fear neutralization, transforming fear from a paralyzing force into a manageable signal. Think about the last time you faced something scary. Maybe it was speaking in front of a crowd, asking for a promotion, or starting something new. Your heart raced, your hands sweated, and your brain screamed, "Don't do it." That's fear working as an internal alarm. But here's the thing. Most of the time, the alarm is exaggerated. Fear doesn't mean you're in danger. It means you're stepping into uncertainty. And that's where growth happens. Fear neutralization doesn't mean ignoring fear. It means reframing it so it no longer controls you. One powerful strategy is to separate fear from action. For example, public speakers often feel terrified before going on stage. Instead of trying to erase the fear, they acknowledge it. Yes, I'm nervous. My body thinks this is danger, but it's just adrenaline. This energy can help me perform. By redefining fear as fuel, they neutralize it. Another approach is exposure in small doses. Think of someone who's afraid of swimming. Jumping straight into the deep end would overwhelm them. But dipping a toe in, then standing in shallow water, then slowly practicing strokes, that gradual exposure neutralizes fear over time. The brain learns, this isn't deadly after all. Cognitive psychology also suggests naming fear out loud. Neuroscientists found that when you label an emotion, I feel scared, I feel anxious, the intensity decreases. Why? Because naming ACT activates the rational part of the brain, calming the emotional centers that are firing alarms. It's like turning a shadow into something you can see clearly. less mysterious, less overwhelming. But fear isn't just personal, it's often amplified socially. Marketers, leaders, and even media outlets know that fear drives attention and behavior. Phrases like, "Don't miss this last chance," or "Act now before it's too late," are built to spark fear. Entire political campaigns thrive on fear. Fear of the other side, fear of losing safety, fear of change. Fear is contagious because when we see others panic, our brains mirror that emotion. Recognizing this is the first step to neutralizing external fear manipulation. Here's a practical example. Imagine a company tells you, "If you don't invest now, you'll fall behind and regret it forever." That message uses fear to push you into action. To neutralize it, you pause and ask, what's the actual risk? Am I making a decision based on evidence or just reacting to fear? That pause breaks the spell, giving you back control. Another everyday scenario. You're afraid to ask someone out because you fear rejection. The fear tells you, it'll be humiliating, you'll never recover. But if you reframe, you realize the worst outcome is a no and I'll move on. The best outcome is I gain a connection. Suddenly the fear shrinks. By shining logic on the exaggerated story, you neutralize its power. Fear neutralization often boils down to 3 steps. Acknowledge the fear. Don't deny it. Name it. Reframe the story. See fear not as a wall but as a signal of growth. Act anyway, in small steps. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's movement in spite of it. The truth is, fear never fully disappears. Even the most confident people feel it. The difference is that they don't let fear steer the wheel. They let it ride in the back seat while they keep driving forward. Fear neutralization is a superpower because once you master it, the doors of opportunity open wider. That conversation you've been avoiding, that dream you've been postponing, that risk you've been afraid to take. Suddenly, they become possible. Not because the fear is gone, but because it no longer decides for you. So the next time fear whispers in your ear, don't fight it and don't obey it. Acknowledge it, shrink it, and move anyway. That's how fear loses its grip and how you reclaim your freedom to grow. Reverse psychology, precision. Reverse psychology is something most people recognize right away. It's when you suggest the opposite of what you want, hoping the other person will resist and end up doing exactly what you intended. Parents, teachers, salespeople, and even friends use it all the time. But while it sounds like a funny trick, it's actually rooted in deep psychology. When used with care, it becomes a very precise tool of influence, what we call reverse psychology precision. The reason it works has to do with something called reactance. Humans don't like being told what to do. If someone says, "You can't have that," our brains immediately push back with, "Yes, I can, and I will." It's a natural defense mechanism that protects our sense of freedom. This is why kids often do the exact opposite of what their parents ask, and why adults sometimes rebel against rules even when they make sense. When reverse psychology is applied carefully, it taps into this instinct. For example, a parent might say, "This book might be too difficult for you." Instantly, the child feels a challenge and wants to prove they can handle it. The parent didn't force the child to read. The child chose to, which makes them feel independent while still moving toward the outcome the parent wanted. Marketers also rely on this technique. A salesperson could say, "This option probably isn't right for you. Most people prefer the other one." Suddenly, the customer feels curious. They might even want to check out the option that was downplayed, because now it feels like they're making a bold, independent choice. The suggestion actually directs them where the seller wanted. Romance works the same way. A playful statement like, "You probably wouldn't want to hang out with me, I'm too boring," often makes the other person lean in and say, "That's not true. I want to spend time with you." It's light. It's fei, iyan, and it makes the other person feel like the decision is entirely theirs. But here's the important part. Reverse psychology doesn't always work. If it's too obvious, people feel manipulated. Imagine telling someone, "Don't eat your vegetables," with a wink. Kids might laugh and play along, but adults will likely roll their eyes. For precision, the approach has to be believable, subtle, and well-timed. The best way to use it is in low-stakes situations. If the choice is too big, like a career decision or a major purchase, people stop and think logically. The trick loses its effect. But in small, everyday situations, it works beautifully. A teacher who says, "You probably won't be able to finish this exercise," sparks determination in students. A friend who says, "You probably wouldn't enjoy this movie," might actually make you more curious to see it. History gives us bigger examples too. During World War II, US officials wanted people to eat less meat so that supplies could go to soldiers. Instead of directly telling families what to do, they released campaigns suggesting that organ meats like liver and kidney were probably not for everyone. The result? Many families felt challenged and curious. They began cooking with those foods, which helped the war effort. This was reverse psychology used on a national scale. To apply it with precision, remember 3 steps. First, know your audience. Strong-willed people respond best because they hate being told what to do. Second, keep it subtle. Hint, don't push. Third, let the other person feel like the decision was their own. The key to precision is not control, but influence. Reverse psychology. Precision is powerful because it plays with the natural human desire for freedom. When people feel like their choices are self-made, they're more committed to them. Used responsibly, it can motivate kids, inspire curiosity, and even help in persuasion. But like any tool, it should be handled carefully. Too much, and people will see through it. At the end of the day, the magic of reverse psychology isn't about tricking someone. It's about guiding them in a way that allows them to feel free while gently steering them toward a beneficial outcome. That's the difference between a cheap gimmick and a precise art. Priming patience. Patience is one of the hardest skills to master in modern life. Everywhere we look, the world pushes us toward instant results. We want fast food, one-day delivery, instant replies, quick money, and immediate success. But deep down, we know that the most meaningful rewards, health, love, learning, wealth, wisdom, take time. The challenge is that our brains are wired to chase short-term gratification. This is where priming patience comes in, a psychological technique to prepare the mind so waiting becomes easier, natural, and even rewarding. Priming in psychology means planting subtle cues that shape how we think and behave. For example, if you see words like calm, slow, steady before starting a task, you are more likely to move carefully and patiently. The mind absorbs these invisible suggestions and adjusts behavior without you realizing it. Priming patience works the same way. It trains your brain to value waiting instead of rushing. Think about a common situation. You're stuck in traffic. Most people get frustrated, tapping the wheel, muttering under their breath, stressing about the delay. But imagine if earlier that morning you listened to a slow, soothing piece of music, or read a story about perseverance and long journeys. Without even noticing, your brain would be primed to handle the traffic calmly. The frustration would feel lighter. You'd think, "It's okay. I'll get there when I get there." That's the subtle power of priming patience. Parents often use this trick with children. For instance, when kids are restless at the doctor's office, a parent might tell them a story about someone who had to wait bravely for a reward. The child absorbs the message and becomes more willing to wait. The story primes their brain to see patience not as suffering, but as strength. Marketers and designers also use this principle, often without us realizing it. Some restaurants play slow background music, so customers linger longer, order more, and enjoy the atmosphere. The music primes patience. In contrast, fast food chains often use upbeat, fast-paced music to push people to eat quickly and leave, because patience isn't what they want in that environment. On a personal level, you can deliberately prime patience in your own life. One method is visual cues. For example, keeping a plant on your desk can remind you that growth takes time. Watching the slow progress of a seed turning into a tree subtly shapes your attitude toward long-term effort. Another method is verbal priming, repeating phrases like, "Slow progress is still progress," or "Every step forward matters." Over time, these phrases condition your brain to tolerate delays and setbacks. Another powerful tool is mental rehearsal. Before facing a situation that requires patience, imagine yourself calmly enduring it. For example, before waiting at the DMV, you might picture yourself sitting peacefully, maybe reading or listening to a podcast. By the time you actually arrive, your brain is already primed for a calmer experience. But priming patience isn't just about surviving waits. It's about thriving in long-term goals. Many people quit fitness programs, businesses, or personal projects because results don't come fast enough. If you prime your brain with reminders that growth takes time, you're more likely to stick with it. Athletes, for example, often watch motivational videos about long journeys and perseverance before training. This primes their mindset for endurance instead of quick wins. The beauty of priming is that it bypasses the need for willpower. You don't have to fight yourself every moment. You set up your environment so patience feels natural. Just like hearing relaxing music can slow your heartbeat, surrounding yourself with patient cues can slow your impulses. The deeper lesson here is that patience is not just a personality trait. It's a state of mind that can be prepared and shaped. By priming yourself with the right words, stories, symbols, and environments, you give your brain the tools to wait gracefully and stay committed. So the next time you find yourself restless or frustrated, ask, what could I put into my mind or my environment to prime patience? Maybe it's a phrase, a song, a memory, or an image. With the right priming, waiting doesn't have to feel like punishment. It can feel like part of the journey. Mere exposure method. Have you ever noticed that the more often you see something, the more you start to like it, even if you didn't care about it at first? Maybe it's a song that sounded average the first time, but after hearing it on the radio all week, suddenly you're humming it. Or a brand logo that becomes familiar just because it pops up everywhere. This is called the mere exposure effect, and when people use it deliberately, it becomes the mere exposure method, a powerful way to build trust, attraction, and influence simply through repetition. The psychology behind it is simple. Our brains are wired to prefer what feels familiar. In ancient times, things that were unfamiliar often meant danger. A new animal, a strange plant, or an unknown person could be a threat. But things we saw often, like family members or common foods, were safe. Over thousands of years, our brains learned familiar equals safe equals good. That's why today, we still feel more comfortable around people, ideas and products we've seen before, even if nothing else has changed. Advertisers use the mere exposure method constantly. That's why you see the same commercial dozens of times. The first time you might ignore it. The 5th time you recognize it. The 10th time it feels familiar. And by the 15th time you might actually trust the brand without realizing why. They didn't win you over with arguments. They won you over with exposure. The same thing happens in relationships. Maybe when you first met someone, you felt neutral or even slightly awkward, but after bumping into them at school, work, or the gym again and again, they started to feel familiar. Over time, that familiarity can turn into comfort, and comfort can turn into attraction or trust. Many friendships and romances start not with fireworks, but with repeated exposure that slowly builds closeness. This method also explains why new ideas, or trends can seem strange at first, but eventually become normal. When smartphones first came out, many people thought they were unnecessary or even silly. But as more people used them and they appeared everywhere, exposure changed perception. Now most people can't imagine life without them. The unfamiliar became familiar, and the familiar became essential. The mere exposure method can also be used for personal growth. For example, if you're afraid of public speaking, you can expose yourself to the experience in small, repeated doses. Speak in front of a mirror, then a friend, then a small group, and so on. Each exposure makes it feel more familiar, and the fear gradually decreases. What once felt terrifying eventually feels normal. But there's an important limit. Too much exposure too quickly can backfire. If a song is overplayed every hour, people get annoyed. If someone pushes their product in your face non-stop, it feels irritating instead of familiar. The key is balance. Enough exposure to build comfort, but not so much that it becomes overwhelming. Here's how you can use the mere exposure method in your life. For relationships, spend consistent time with people you want to grow closer to. Familiarity builds connection. For influence, if you want your ideas to spread, repeat them often in simple ways. People trust what they hear repeatedly. For personal growth, expose yourself gradually to things that scare you. Familiarity will shrink the fear. For business or branding, show up consistently, through posts, ads, or content, so people recognize and remember you. The takeaway is powerful. People don't always choose what's best. They often choose what feels familiar. And familiarity is something you can create. By using the mere exposure method with patience and balance, you can make yourself, your ideas, or your work not just seen, but trusted. So next time you wonder why that song grew on you, or why you suddenly like a brand you never cared about, remember, it's not magic, it's exposure. And once you see it, you can use it, both to understand how you're being influenced and to influence others more effectively. Compliance through touch. Touch is one of the oldest and most powerful forms of human communication. Long before language, humans relied on touch to signal safety, comfort, and connection. A gentle pat on the back, a reassuring hand on the shoulder, or even a light brush of the arm can change how we feel and act. Psychologists have found that touch can do more than comfort. It can actually increase compliance, making people more likely to agree, cooperate, or help. This subtle phenomenon is called compliance through touch. At first, it sounds almost unbelievable. How could such a small physical gesture affect decision-making? But studies consistently show that touch builds trust and warmth instantly. When someone touches us lightly, it triggers our brain to release oxytocin, the bonding hormone. This chemical makes us feel connected and safe, lowering resistance. Even a brief touch on the arm can make people more open to requests. Consider a famous experiment from the 1980s. In one study, waitresses who lightly touched customers on the arm while handing back change received significantly larger tips than those who didn't. Nothing else changed. The food, the service, the restaurant stayed the same. The only difference was a brief, casual touch. That single gesture made customers feel more positive, more connected, and more generous. The effect isn't limited to restaurants. Teachers who gently touch a student's shoulder when giving feedback are often perceived as warmer and more supportive, which increases the student's willingness to participate. Doctors who use a reassuring touch during medical consultations are often rated as more trustworthy, and their patients are more likely to follow their advice. In customer service, a subtle touch during an interaction can leave people feeling valued and respected, even if the actual service was routine. But it's not only about trust, it's about influence. Touch communicates confidence. Imagine two managers giving instructions. One simply speaks, while the other lightly pats your shoulder as they encourage you. The second manager's touch adds weight to their words, making them feel more personal and motivating. The request feels less like a command and more like shared encouragement. Of course, context matters enormously. A touch that feels friendly in one situation could feel uncomfortable or inappropriate in another. That's why precision is key. The most effective compliance touches are light, brief, and socially acceptable, like a pat on the back, a handshake, or a gentle touch on the forearm. Anything longer, firmer, or too personal can cross boundaries and have the opposite effect, creating discomfort instead of connection. Cultural differences also play a role. In some cultures, casual touch is common and expected. In others, it may feel intrusive. Skilled communicators pay attention to the social context and the comfort level of the other person. Compliance through touch only works when the touch feels natural and respectful. On a personal level, you've probably felt this effect without realizing it. Think of the last time a friend comforted you with a hug, or a colleague patted your back after a stressful moment. Those small gestures not only reassured you emotionally, but they also made you more open to their suggestions or help. Touch lowered your defenses. There's also a reverse angle. Noticing when you're being influenced by touch. If a salesperson or stranger uses light, friendly touches while making a request, it's worth asking yourself, am I agreeing because I really want to, or because the touch lowered my resistance? Awareness turns unconscious influence into conscious choice. The beauty of compliance through touch is that it highlights something profound. Humans are wired for connection. We don't just think with our brains, we also respond with our bodies. A single touch can say, I'm here with you. You can trust me. You're not alone. And that feeling of closeness makes us far more willing to cooperate. So the next time you want to encourage, motivate, or reassure someone, remember the hidden power of touch. When used with respect, it doesn't just comfort. It gently guides people toward openness, trust, and action. That's why even the smallest touch can make the biggest difference. Authenticity illusion. In today's world, authenticity is one of the most admired traits. We love people who seem genuine, natural, and real. We say things like, they're so authentic, or I trust them because they don't pretend. But here's the twist. Authenticity isn't always as real as it looks. Sometimes what feels authentic is carefully crafted. This is the authenticity illusion. The idea that authenticity can be performed, projected, or manipulated in ways that make us believe someone is genuine, even when they are being strategic. Think about social media influencers. Many of them gain trust by appearing raw and unfiltered. They share stories of their struggles, post photos without makeup, or talk about their vulnerabilities. To viewers, it feels refreshing and real, but behind the scenes, these posts are often carefully planned. The angle, the lighting, the timing, even the wording, it's all calculated. It doesn't mean they're fake. It just means their authentic image is being managed. The illusion works because it feels real, not because it actually is. Politicians also use the authenticity illusion. A candidate might roll up their sleeves, eat at a local diner, or stumble over words in a speech to seem more relatable. These gestures make people think they're just like us. In reality, every detail is often rehearsed. The shirt sleeves are rolled up by an aide, the diner is chosen for optics, and the unscripted slip-up might even be intentional. Authenticity becomes a performance designed to build trust. Even in personal relationships, people project authenticity strategically. Think of someone on a first date who says, I'm just going to be totally honest. I hate games. That statement itself is a move to appear authentic. Ironically, the act of claiming honesty can sometimes be a tactic to lower the other person's guard. The authenticity illusion is powerful because it taps into our natural desire for honesty and trustworthiness. So why do we fall for it? Because our brains are wired to seek signs of truth. When someone makes mistakes, shows flaws, or seems casual, we interpret those signals as honesty. Psychologists call this the Pratfall Effect. Small imperfections make people appear more human, which makes them more likable. The authenticity illusion builds on that instinct by sprinkling in just enough imperfection to seem real, while keeping the deeper strategy hidden. Marketers are masters of this game. Brands will advertise themselves as authentic, family-owned, or just like you. Fast food chains might talk about grandma's recipes. Tech companies may release behind-the-scenes videos of ordinary employees sharing their stories. These campaigns are polished and expensive, but they succeed because they trick the brain into feeling, this is real. But here's the catch. Authenticity illusion isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it's a bridge. A leader who shares a personal story might be carefully choosing that story for maximum impact, but the story still connects people emotionally. An influencer who shows their messy morning routine might stage parts of it, but the overall message, life isn't perfect, can still resonate with followers. The illusion doesn't necessarily erase the truth, it enhances it in a way that makes it more digestible. The danger is when authenticity is faked to manipulate. If someone pretends to be vulnerable only to sell you something, or acts genuine only to gain power, the illusion becomes a weapon. That's why critical thinking is so important. When you hear someone say, "I'm just being real," pause and ask, are they really being open, or are they using the illusion of openness to influence me? On the other hand, we can use the authenticity illusion in positive ways ourselves. For example, a teacher might share a carefully chosen story about their own struggles to make students feel more comfortable with failure. A manager might admit a small mistake to make employees more willing to take risks. These aren't lies. They're strategic choices that use the illusion of rawness to build connection and trust. At its heart, authenticity illusion reminds us that what feels real is not always accidental. Sometimes it's shaped, practiced, and performed. But that doesn't always make it fake. It makes it human. We all edit ourselves in different contexts. We act one way with family, another way with friends, another way at work. Each version feels authentic in the moment, even though it's a performance. The real power is recognizing the illusion. When you see through it, you gain freedom. You stop blindly trusting people just because they seem real, and you start asking, what's the intention behind this display of authenticity? At the same time, you can learn to use the illusion ethically, to connect, to inspire, and to bridge gaps with others. So next time someone seems perfectly genuine, remember, authenticity can be as much about presentation as truth. And sometimes, the most authentic-seeming person in the room is also the most carefully constructed. That's the paradox of authenticity illusion. It feels real, even when it's designed. Peak end rule. Think back to the last vacation you took. When you tell the story, you probably don't remember every single moment of the trip in detail. Instead, your memory focuses on two key things: the very best or worst moment, and how the trip ended. Maybe it was that breathtaking sunset you saw on the beach, or maybe it was the awful flight home. Those moments stick in your mind, and they shape how you feel about the entire vacation. This is the peak end rule, a psychological shortcut where people judge an experience not by its total length or every detail, but by its emotional peak and its ending. Psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Barbara Fredrickson discovered this effect in the 1990s through a series of experiments. One famous study involved people immersing their hands in painfully cold water. In one trial, participants kept their hands submerged for 60 seconds. In another, they did the same thing, but had an extra 30 seconds at the end where the water was slightly warmer. Still uncomfortable, but less painful. Objectively, the second trial was worse, since it lasted longer, but surprisingly, most people preferred the second trial and even chose to repeat it. Why? Because the ending was less unpleasant. Their memory of the experience was shaped more by how it ended than by the total duration of discomfort. This rule shows up everywhere in daily life. Think of a movie. If the middle drags, but the ending is powerful and emotional, most people will say, "That was a great movie." On the other hand, if the film was good all the way through, but the ending disappointed, the whole experience feels ruined. The same goes for concerts, sports games, meals, and even relationships. A great ending can elevate the memory, while a poor ending can overshadow everything else. Businesses use the peak end rule all the time. Hotels, for example, know that guests remember the peak, like an incredible meal or stunning view, and the ending, like the checkout process. That's why many hotels add small farewell touches, like offering free coffee at checkout or a thank you note in the room. They want to make sure the last impression is warm because it will shape the guest's overall memory of the stay. Doctors also apply this rule when treating patients. Medical procedures are often painful or uncomfortable, but research shows that if the procedure ends more gently, patients remember it as less traumatic. The same length of pain can feel more tolerable if the ending is eased. This has major implications for healthcare. How people remember care matters almost as much as the care itself. Even in relationships, the peak-end rule plays a big role. A romance that had many happy moments but ended with betrayal or bitterness is often remembered as bad overall. The painful ending colors the memory more than all the joy that came before. Conversely, a relationship with ups and downs may be remembered fondly if it ended on a warm, respectful note. So how can we use the peak-end rule in our own lives? One way is to design memorable peaks. If you're hosting an event, focus on creating one truly exciting or emotional highlight that people will never forget. It doesn't have to last long. Just one strong peak can define the whole experience. The second way is to control the ending. Whether it's a conversation, a performance, a project, or even a vacation, make sure to close it on a high note. People will forgive many small flaws if the ending leaves them smiling.
Here's a practical example. Imagine you're giving a presentation at work. Maybe the middle drags a little, but if you deliver one powerful story, the peak, and end with a strong, confident conclusion, your audience will walk away impressed. They won't remember every detail. They'll remember the high point and the ending. The peak-end rule also gives us perspective on how we judge our own lives. We often overvalue the highs and lows and the way chapters end, while ignoring the many ordinary but meaningful moments in between. Being aware of this bias can help us appreciate the full picture, instead of letting one peak or one ending define everything. At its core, the peak-end rule teaches us that memory is not a perfect recording. It's a storyteller, highlighting dramatic peaks and final chapters while compressing the rest. If we want to shape how people remember us, our work, or our experiences, we should pay attention to those two parts. Create meaningful peaks, and make sure the ending resonates. So the next time you plan something important, ask yourself, what will be the peak moment people carry with them, and how will it end? Because in the end, that's what they'll remember. Embedded command technique. Imagine someone telling you a story, and hidden inside their words is a suggestion that slips past your conscious mind and takes root in your subconscious. You don't even notice it happening, but later you find yourself feeling more motivated, more trusting, or more likely to act in a certain way. That's the embedded command technique, a subtle communication method that uses carefully placed words or phrases to guide behavior without triggering resistance. The idea comes from the world of hypnosis and neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. The brain is constantly filtering information, deciding what to pay attention to and what to ignore. Most direct commands like, buy this, do this, trust me, set off mental alarms. We resist them because we don't like being controlled. But when a command is woven seamlessly into a sentence or story, it often slips by unnoticed. Your conscious mind hears a casual statement, but your subconscious hears an instruction. Here's a simple example. Instead of saying, you should relax, someone might say, many people, when they sit in this chair, find themselves starting to relax. Notice how the phrase, starting to relax, is the embedded command. It doesn't feel forced. It feels natural, like part of the sentence, but your brain still processes it as a suggestion. Salespeople often use this technique. For example, instead of saying, buy this car, they might say, when you drive this car down the road, you'll feel how smooth it handles. The embedded command is drive this car. It paints a mental picture, guiding you to imagine ownership before you've even made the decision. That mental rehearsal makes you more likely to say yes. Teachers and coaches also use embedded commands to motivate. A teacher might say, as you keep working on these problems, you'll notice your confidence growing. The hidden command, keep working, is disguised inside encouragement. A coach might say, when you take that first step, you'll start to feel stronger. Again, the action is embedded, not demanded. One reason this works is because the subconscious doesn't argue the way the conscious mind does. If you hear, don't think of a pink elephant,
your mind immediately pictures one. Embedded commands work in a similar way. They plant seeds that grow quietly in the background. The listener feels like they're making their own choices, when in reality, they've been nudged. But this technique requires finesse. If it's too obvious, people feel manipulated. For example, saying, "You're going to want to buy this right now," sounds pushy and breaks the illusion. True embedded commands are gentle, almost invisible. They rely on tone, pacing, and context. Often, the emphasis is placed on certain words, so the subconscious picks them up even if the conscious mind ignores them. Therapists sometimes use embedded commands to help patients. Instead of saying, "You need to let go of your anxiety," a therapist might say, "As you breathe slowly, you may find yourself letting go of tension little by little." The phrase "letting go" is the embedded command, framed as a possibility, not a demand. Patients feel free, but their subconscious receives a gentle instruction to relax. Everyday conversations are full of embedded commands without us realizing it. Think of a friend saying, "When you finally take that trip, you'll love it." The embedded command is "take that trip." Or a parent saying, "As you grow older, you'll see why this is important." The command is "see why this is important." These aren't accidents. They're natural patterns of language that guide thought. Of course, like any influence tool, this can be misused. In politics or advertising, embedded commands can be used to manipulate decisions subtly. A campaign ad might say, "When you vote for real change, you'll feel proud." The command, "vote for real change," is hidden inside an emotional appeal. Being aware of these tactics makes you less vulnerable. But used ethically, the embedded command technique is powerful. Parents can use it to encourage children. Teachers can use it to inspire learning. Leaders can use it to motivate teams. And friends can use it to support one another. The goal isn't control. It's persuasion without pressure. At its core, the embedded command works because it bypasses resistance. People don't like being ordered around, but they do like feeling free. By weaving instructions into natural speech, you let people feel ownership of the decision. And when people believe they chose freely, they commit more strongly. So next time you're telling a story or giving advice, think about your words. Instead of direct orders, try embedding gentle suggestions. You may find that people not only listen more, but they act, without even realizing why. That's the quiet power of the embedded command technique. Reciprocity Preloading. Humans have a built-in rule of social life. When someone gives us something, we feel the urge to give something back. This is called the rule of reciprocity, and it's so deeply rooted that it works across cultures and ages. If a friend buys you lunch, you feel a small tug inside that says, "I should get the next one." If a stranger holds the door for you, you naturally want to smile or thank them. Reciprocity is one of the invisible forces that keep social life running smoothly. But here's where it gets interesting. You don't have to wait for someone to act first. You can preload reciprocity. That is, give something in advance with the quiet expectation, or at least the likelihood, that people will want to return the favor later. This technique is called reciprocity preloading, and it's one of the simplest but most powerful ways to influence others. Salespeople and marketers use it constantly. Think about free samples at a grocery store. On the surface, it's just generosity. You get a taste of a new cheese or snack, but underneath, it's reciprocity preloading. You've received something for free, and even if you don't consciously think about it, part of your brain feels the urge to balance the scales. Buying the product becomes more tempting, not just because it tastes good, but because you feel a subtle obligation. Charities use this principle too. Ever notice how some non-profits send you a small gift in the mail, like personalized address labels, a pen, or a holiday card, before asking for a donation? That's reciprocity preloading in action. You didn't ask for those labels, but now that you have them, donating feels harder to resist. Your brain whispers, "They already gave me something. I should return the kindness." This technique also works in relationships in everyday life. Imagine you're new at work, and on your first day you bring donuts fee, or the office. You haven't asked anyone for help yet, but you've planted a seed. Later, when you need a hand learning the ropes, people will be more willing to assist. You preloaded reciprocity with a small gesture of generosity. What makes reciprocity preloading so powerful is that it works even when people don't consciously notice it. A light compliment, a small favor, or even a warm smile can put others in a frame of mind where they're more open to your requests. The gift doesn't have to be material. It can be time, attention, or kindness. Of course, like any influence method, it can backfire if it feels manipulative. If someone senses you're giving only to get something back, the magic disappears. Reciprocity works best when the gesture feels sincere. That's why the most skilled users of this technique don't rush the return. They give freely, knowing that people naturally want to repay kindness when the time is right. Here's a simple everyday example. Suppose you want to build a stronger connection with a neighbor. You could bring over some homemade cookies without expecting anything in return. A week later, when you need help moving a heavy piece of furniture, that neighbor will likely jump at the chance, not because you demanded it, but because they feel a natural desire to reciprocate. The science of reciprocity preloading shows up even in negotiation. If one side offers a small concession early, the other side often feels pressure to offer something back. That's why skilled negotiators start by giving something minor. It sets the tone for cooperation and makes the other side more flexible. What's fascinating is that reciprocity preloading doesn't just influence others, it shapes how people see you. Acts of generosity make you appear kinder, more trustworthy, and more likable. People don't just want to repay you, they want to stay connected to someone who makes them feel valued. The takeaway is simple but profound. If you want cooperation, trust, or support, start by giving first. It doesn't have to be big, it just has to be real. A kind word, a thoughtful gesture, a little help at the right time. These small acts preload reciprocity, setting the stage for stronger relationships and smoother influence. So the next time you're hoping someone will say yes, ask yourself, what can I give first? Because often the fastest way to receive is to give. That's the quiet genius of reciprocity preloading. It turns generosity into a cycle that comes back to you, sometimes in ways far bigger than you imagined. Inverted motivation. Most of the time when we think about motivation, we picture rewards pulling us forward. We study for good grades, work for promotions, or exercise for health. The reward is the carrot at the end of the stick, and we chase it. But human psychology is more complicated than that. Sometimes people are not motivated by moving toward rewards. They are driven by moving away from pain, fear, or failure. This flip in perspective is called inverted motivation, and when understood, it becomes a powerful way to push yourself or others to act. Imagine a student who just can't seem to study. Every day they tell themselves, I should study to get a good grade. But the promise of a good grade isn't strong enough to overcome distractions. Now imagine the same student realizing, if I don't study, I'll fail, and failing means repeating this class. Suddenly the fear of failure sparks energy. They pick up their books. That's inverted motivation. Action triggered not by chasing the reward, but by escaping the loss. This principle shows up everywhere. Athletes often train not just for the joy of winning, but to avoid the shame of losing. Workers might meet deadlines, not because they love the task, but because they fear being seen as unreliable. People save money, not only to build wealth, but to avoid poverty or insecurity. Inverted motivation is about flipping the frame. Instead of asking, what do I want to gain? You ask, what do I refuse to lose? Psychologists call this loss aversion, the fact that humans hate losing more than they enjoy winning. Research shows that losing $100 feels about twice as painful as gaining $100 feels good. That means fear of loss can be a stronger motivator than hope of gain. Inverted motivation taps into that bias. When used carefully, it can be the push that gets someone moving when rewards alone aren't enough. Marketers and leader. often use this tactic deliberately. A fitness coach might say, "Every day you skip exercise, you're falling behind the version of yourself you could be." That reframes the action in terms of avoiding loss. A company might advertise with messages like, "Don't miss out on this limited time offer," instead of, "Here's a great deal." Both point to the same thing, but the inverted framing, fear of missing out, creates urgency. But inverted motivation isn't only about fear. It can also be about pride, identity, and self-image. A musician might practice daily not because they're chasing fame, but because they refuse to let themselves perform poorly. A parent might work long hours, not for the thrill of money, but because they refuse to let their family struggle. Inverted motivation kicks in when the thought of not acting feels worse than the effort of acting. Of course, this method has a shadow side. Too much inverted motivation can create anxiety, burnout, or resentment. If everything in life becomes about avoiding failure, life starts to feel like constant pressure instead of joyful growth. That's why balance is key. The most effective approach often combines both: rewards pulling you forward and inverted motivation pushing you away from stagnation. Together they form a powerful double engine of action. You can use inverted motivation on yourself in simple ways. One trick is to imagine your future self looking back with regret if you don't act. For example, before skipping a workout you ask, "Will I regret this tomorrow?" That small mental shift can turn laziness into action. Another method is accountability, telling a friend your goal and knowing you'll face embarrassment if you don't follow through. The pain of letting someone down becomes motivation. In relationships, inverted motivation can strengthen bonds. For example, reminding yourself, "If I stop putting in effort, I could lose this friendship," can push you to make the call or plan the visit, even when you're tired. It's not the promise of reward, it's the fear of loss that motivates. Businesses also structure inverted motivation into contracts and systems. Gyms that charge monthly fees, even if you don't show up, rely on people's dislike of wasting money. Subscription models do the same. The thought of losing money for nothing keeps customers engaged, even when they aren't fully committed. At its core, inverted motivation is about turning pain into fuel. It recognizes that humans aren't just pleasure seekers, we're also pain avoiders. When used wisely, this can help break procrastination, push through fear, and spark action in moments where rewards aren't enough. So the next time you're struggling to find motivation, flip the question. Don't just ask, "What do I want to achieve?" Ask instead, "What do I refuse to lose? What pain am I unwilling to accept?" Sometimes the greatest drive doesn't come from the dream in front of us, but from the fear of what we'll leave behind if we stop moving. That's the raw power of inverted motivation. It transforms fear into momentum. Door in the face. Imagine someone asks you for a massive favor, something so big that you instantly want to say no. For example, a stranger might say, "Can you donate $500 today to support our cause?" You decline, of course, but then they follow up immediately with a much smaller request. "Okay, would you be willing to give just $20 instead?" Suddenly, that smaller request feels far more reasonable, and you're much more likely to say yes. This clever persuasion strategy is called the door-in-the-face technique. The name comes from the idea of slamming a door in someone's face after they make a big request, but instead of leaving, the person comes back with something smaller. Psychologists discovered that people are more likely to agree to the smaller request because of two powerful forces: contrast and reciprocity. Contrast makes the second request seem tiny compared to the first. If someone asked for $20 up front, you might hesitate. But compared to $500, $20 feels like nothing. Reciprocity also plays a role. When the requester concedes and lowers their demand, you feel a subconscious urge to concede too, by agreeing. You think, "They backed down, so I should meet them halfway." This method has been studied for decades. In one famous experiment, researchers asked students to volunteer as counselors for troubled youth for 2 years, several hours per week. Almost everyone said no. But when the researchers followed up with a smaller request to chaperone one group of youth on a single trip to the zoo, compliance skyrocketed. Students felt more willing after rejecting the big request because the smaller one seemed like a fair compromise. You've probably experienced this in everyday life. A teenager might first ask their parents for a week-long trip with friends. When the parents say no, the teen backs down and asks for just a weekend away. The smaller request now seems reasonable in comparison, and the parents are more likely to agree. The same logic applies in business negotiations, sales, and even friendships. Charities often use this method without you realizing. They might start by asking you to commit to a large monthly donation. When you refuse, they quickly follow up with, "Would you be willing to make a one-time donation today?" That smaller request feels manageable, and because you said no already, you're more likely to say yes this time to relieve the tension. The door-in-the-face technique works so well because it plays with our sense of fairness and social obligation. We don't like saying no outright. It makes us feel guilty or unhelpful. When the second request comes, it feels like a chance to redeem ourselves. Agreeing balances the social scale. Of course, this method can be misused. If people sense manipulation, they may become resistant. Imagine someone constantly inflating their first request just to make the second one look better. Over time, you'd stop trusting them. That's why the technique works best when the initial big request is believable, even if unrealistic. It has to feel like something the other person genuinely wanted, not just a setup. The technique also has limits. If the first request is too extreme, like asking for $1 million, people won't take the second request seriously. The contrast must be large enough to create relief, but not so large that it feels ridiculous. Precision matters. In personal life, you can use the door-in-the-face technique responsibly. For example, if you're negotiating chores with a roommate, you might first suggest they clean the whole apartment weekly. When they refuse, you suggest, "Okay, how about just handling the kitchen?" They'll likely agree, because compared to the first request, the second feels fair. Both sides win. Interestingly, this method also teaches us something about our own decision-making. When we feel pressured by requests, we often judge them in relation to what came before, not on their actual merit. Recognizing this pattern helps us pause and ask, would I agree to this smaller request if it was asked first? That question breaks the spell of the door-in-the-face technique and restores perspective. At its heart, the technique isn't just about tricking people, it's about understanding human psychology. We respond to fairness, we compare options, and we prefer compromise over flat rejection. The door-in-the-face method uses those instincts to guide behavior. So the next time you're faced with a request that seems surprisingly easy after a bigger one, take a step back. Ask yourself, is this something I truly want to agree to, or am I just reacting to the contrast? And if you're the one making requests, remember that sometimes the fastest way to get a yes is to start with a no. That's the genius of the door-in-the-face technique. It turns rejection into an opportunity, and it transforms compromise into compliance.